She had thought she had finally escaped the pain of her past, until the man she once loved became the reason she was humiliated again. At a lavish party filled with wealth and whispers, his new wife mocked her for something she never chose, something she silently carried for years. And he stood there, laughing. What none of them knew was that the truth was already on its way, and it would shatter every lie they built their lives on. Because sometimes the deepest wounds are not scars, but secrets waiting to explode. And when this one did, nothing was ever the same again. Before everything unraveled, her life was quiet, almost painfully ordinary. Maya had built her world slowly, piece by piece, after a marriage that drained more from her than she ever admitted. She lived in a modest townhouse on the edge of the city, worked at a community arts center, and spent her evenings surrounded by children who saw her not for the color of her skin, but for the warmth in her smile. It wasn't the life she once dreamed of, but it was peaceful, and for the first time in years, she felt in control. People who met her now had no idea what she had endured. They didn't know how many nights she cried alone, convinced she was the problem, that her inability to have children made her somehow less. They didn't know how deeply her ex-husband's subtle comments chipped away at her confidence, or how often she questioned her worth in a world where black women were already told they had to fight twice as hard to be seen as enough. Yet there was something about the quiet strength in the way she carried herself. She never spoke about her past, never revisited wounds she had already worked so hard to heal. But healing isn't the same thing as forgetting, especially when the person who hurt you now lived a life of extravagant luxury, praised for charm he had never earned. And when she received an unsolicited invitation to a charity gala, hosted by none other than her ex-husband and his stunning new wife, familiar tension coiled in her chest. She wasn't sure why she was invited. She wasn't sure she wanted to go. But something told her this night wouldn't be as harmless as it seemed. Something told her that the past wasn't done with her yet. The night of the gala brings with it a chill in the air, the kind that creeps under the skin and settles there. Maya reminded herself that she had every right to walk into that ballroom. She was invited, and she was deserving. But the moment she stepped onto the marble floor, she felt it. The shift in the room, the quiet pause, the way eyes flicked toward her and then away, as if her presence disrupted the perfectly polished image of the elite crowd. She continued walking, never once shrinking. Still, as she entered further into the glowing hall, the contrast between her gentle elegance and the outrageousness around her came into sharper focus. Gold accents, towering floral sculptures, crystal chandeliers. It was all so staged for people who live above consequences. And right at the middle of it all, loudly laughing as cameras flashed around him, stood her ex, Adrian. He was almost unreal in his tailored suit, polished and powerful in ways he had never been when they were together. Beside him stood his new wife, Lila, beautiful, young, effortlessly glamorous, the kind of woman people looked at with admiration, not assumptions, not stereotypes, not judgment born from skin. Maya tried to keep her distance, but it was impossible to blend in. Not here, not tonight. She could feel the glances, the whispers that weren't loud enough to hear but sharp enough to sting. Some looked curious, others looked dismissive. A few looked irritated, as if her very presence disrupted the air they breathed. Still, she stayed. But then, everything changed. From across the room, Lila spotted her. She leaned into Adrian, whispering something behind a manicured hand, and together they turned in Maya's direction. not with recognition, not with kindness, with amusement. And that was the first crack. Maya felt it like a spark against dry grass. As the night wore on, the whispers grew bolder. Some women eyed her with thin smiles that didn't reach their eyes. A pair of older men exchanged a look that made her feel she was being weighed and measured. And then came the moment that pushed the tension into something darker. Lila approached her during a silent auction presentation, her voice honeyed, but her eyes steel. She spoke loudly enough to be heard by other guests, asking Maya if she had come alone, commenting on how free her life must feel without children, how some women simply aren't meant for motherhood, and how lucky Adrian was to have moved on to someone designed for family. The words weren't innocent. They were daggers coated in sugar, and Adrian, standing just behind his wife, laughed. Not a shy laugh, not an unsure laugh. A laugh from someone who wanted others to join in. And some did. Maya felt the world tilt for a second, her throat constricted, her chest hollowed, her breath caught in that place that felt so familiar. This wasn't just humiliation. This wasn't just cruelty. That was the very pain she had spent years clawing her way out of. But before she could step back, before she could breathe, before she could decide whether to walk away or stand her ground, something else happened. A voice behind her called her name. A voice she had hoped never to hear again. And when she turned, everything she thought she knew about the past began to crack open. The real truth was finally coming, and it wasn't what they expected. The room fell silent the moment Maya turned. Standing behind her was Dr. Ellis, the quiet fertility specialist she had seen years ago, the only person who knew the truth she had been too afraid to face. His presence alone was enough to make her heart stumble, but what he said next shattered whatever strength she had left. He asked, in soft but clear words, if she had ever received the letter he sent, the one that explained what he had found after her last tests. Maya froze. A cold heaviness diffused into her chest. Letter? What letter? All eyes went to her. Lila leaned forward, ready for more drama. Adrian crossed his arms over his chest, confident, mocking, waiting for the moment to smirk once more. He had always blamed her for their childless marriage, had always used it as a quiet strike against her, a weapon in arguments, an excuse to move on to someone better. Dr. Ellis hesitated for only a moment until he spoke, and his words cracked the entire room open. He explained that Maya had never been the issue. She had been perfectly healthy, but the infertility had come from Adrian. A ripple ran through the crowd, and gasps filled the air. Shocked whispers. Lila stepped back, as if the floor had shifted under her heels. Adrian's face drained of color. His polished confidence dissolved into something raw, exposed, and terrified. The air rushed out of Maya's lungs. Years of guilt, of shame, of self-blame, all crashed in that instant. The truth she had begged for, cried for, prayed for, had been kept from her, stolen from her, hidden by the man who now mocked her. But Dr. Ellis wasn't finished. He shared how he had tried reaching out to her several times, and that someone had asked his clinic to send all correspondence to the husband instead. And the moment he said that, the room didn't just gasp, it recoiled. Because everyone knew precisely who would have done that. Maya's hands shook, but it was not weakness. Rather, it was the rising force of all that had been denied to her. Every insult, every whisper, every wound suddenly had a source. And now the world was staring at Adrian, waiting to hear what he would say, waiting for him to confess what he had done. But he said nothing. He couldn't, because the truth wasn't finished with him yet. The room did not recover from the truth. No amount of affluence, no glistening chandelier, no polished speeches could smoothen what just had been exposed. Adrian stood frozen, devoid of any image he had learned to fabricate, an image he carved out at the cost of the woman he once swore to protect. And as murmurs started getting louder and louder, Lila slowly stepped back from him, the admiration in her eyes replaced with something far sharper: fear, embarrassment, regret. Maya didn't say a word. She didn't need to. For the first time in years, the weight she had carried, the shame she had absorbed, the silence she had endured, was lifted from her shoulders. She walked away from that mocking couple not with anger, but with the quiet dignity she had always possessed. The crowd parted for her, not out of courtesy, but out of recognition. They saw her, really saw her. But the world outside that ballroom didn't change overnight. It was not just the story of a cruel husband or a vicious insult. It was about how easily a black woman's pain is dismissed, how society is quick to assume, quick to judge, quick to place blame where it does not belong. It was about the stereotypes that lingered in the shadows, shaping perceptions, shaping opportunities, shaping lives, and how the lies that were told about her were believed simply because they fit into the quiet prejudices people didn't want to admit they carried. In the weeks that followed, Maya found strength in finally knowing the truth. Her healing, once interrupted, began again, this time not burdened by self-blame. Adrian's reputation cracked under the pressure of his own deceit, but that was no victory she needed to celebrate. Her victory was reclaiming her story, and for everyone watching, her story is a reminder. How many more lives are shaped by lies rooted in prejudice? How many more voices are silenced by shame that was never theirs to carry? Maybe the real question is, when will we finally stop letting racism write the narrative and start listening to the truth?